Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to have you here, and we're really looking forward to spending today's day discussing education and biodiversity together with all of you. Suera, over to you.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us in today. This is one of the most passionate topics that we have under GYBN, and we're really happy that we're able to have this intergenerational dialogue at the IUCN Global Youth Summit. And today, I think it's going to be a really exciting discussion where each and every one of you needs to tell us what you think about education and how you think it can be transformative. So, please ensure to be there. There's no presentations, just maybe a little bit of an overview, and then we go into something exciting with all of you. So before we start, I thought we could give you a little bit of a update on what GYBN is, for those of you who don't know us. Though I see there are like several of you here from our amazing community, but in case there's anybody else who doesn't know us, I could explain that as well to you guys. So just to make everyone aware, please ensure that you mute your microphones when you're not speaking so that there's no background while the speakers speak. And ensure you switch on your video and camera if possible. It's always nice to see your lovely faces. And this meeting is being recorded. Okay, so thank you. And yeah, let me give you the quick update of what GYBN is. For those of you who don't know us, we are a global network of individuals and youth organizations that are active on biodiversity. We're also the international coordination platform for youth participation under the Convention on Biological Diversity. To give you a snapshot of what we are, we call ourselves a vibrant youth movement for biodiversity. And we have, over the last 10 years of our existence, been able to create, together with all the amazing people on this call and many more, we've been able to create a massive global movement of young people. We are now currently having over 46 national chapters, which are national networks linked to GYBN. We are now close to 600 member organizations, and all our chapters have done very exciting projects with over 100 different projects all over on the ground. Supporting their countries, their organizations, and national civil society NGOs as well. We've also given scholarships to over 210 youth delegates all across the globe to join and participate in key negotiations and events. Currently, we have over 1 million members, and we represent around 150 countries. We've also been able to create a good, massive social media presence over the last few years, which is building, as you can see here. So yes, that's all about us. And now over to what we are doing as a community. So just to give you a last 3 glimpses of like what are the key areas of work that we have. We work on empowerment and capacity building. We work on advocacy and campaigning work at the national and the international level. Under empowerment and capacity building, we do several kinds of capacity building workshops at the national and regional levels. And we conduct several empowerment-related events across the year. And finally, we also work on mobilizing more and more young people to join the movement, as well as do exciting actions on the ground. So that's a glimpse about us. And definitely all this is being done youth-led.
Thank you so much, Suera. Yeah, we have today a very exciting day ahead. What we're gonna be doing today is we're gonna be having a dialogue all together across generations on what is our vision for education for the future. What is our vision for ensuring that that our systems of learning and educating lead us to a future in harmony with nature? What is working? What is not working? What needs to be done better? And in order to discuss, have a good discussion in relation to this, we have invited a set of very exciting speakers. We have been joined by L.A. Piluden, who is an indigenous educator from Cordillera in the Philippines. She's a teacher. She has facilitated heritage-based research in St. Mary's School of Sagara, where she works with students in community-oriented heritage mapping projects focusing on topics ranging from oral tradition to natural heritage. And she's right now teaching at the University of the Philippines. We also have a student, Ankit Tripathi, who is from the steering committee of the Global Student Forum. Ankit is a student organizing and serving as international students representative for the Canadian Federation of Students. And he organizes students and lobbies administrators as well as politicians in Canada for publicly funded post-secondary education and inclusion of international students in public services. We also have Sean Southey, who is the chair for Commission on Education and Communication at the IUCN. He has over 25 years of experience in the development and communications field. And he has also spent 12 years in the United Nations Development Program, 5 years in the Canadian government, and 3 years working with other international non-government organizations. So it's definitely someone that has a very wide background in many different areas. We have also Bernard Combs from UNESCO. He supports UNESCO's activities on education for sustainable development. He's also the education sector focal point for biodiversity and UNESCO's focal point for the Earth Charter. And among other things, he works to reinforce cooperation with other agencies and stakeholders in regards with communication, education, and public awareness in areas that have to do with biodiversity, water, oceans, cities, and overall sustainable lifestyles. And finally, we have with us Grecia Bárcenas Calderón, and she's a student, and she has been a scout for the last 21 years. And this has allowed her to experience non-formal education in a deep way that has shaped her life and personality. So currently, she's a youth representative at the World Organization of the Scout Movement, and she's a member of the steering committee of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. She has also an entrepreneurship that aims to conserve the biocultural heritage of Mexico through alternative tourism. So as you can see, we have a very diverse panel, and we have organized it in this way to ensure that we have as many views as possible on this discussion. But it's not gonna be only them that will be talking about education and biodiversity, but we also would like to hear your opinions on this very important topic. Therefore, the first thing that we will be doing to get to know each other is to try to understand better who we are, who is in the room today. So what I'm gonna ask you, all of you, to take your phones or your computer and go to ahaslides.com and go to GYBN TE, which is the link that you will find here, and answer to the questions that you will find there. And then we're gonna be looking at those answers to see a little bit what is the demographics we have today present in this session. So I'll give you 2 minutes to do so. All right, we see a lot of positive feelings today on how people is feeling today. We see people are feeling empowered, hopeful, they're curious, they're ready to learn, they're inspired, they're happy, people are feeling amazing. And that's really, really good. And we're really happy because we do actually need to have all the possible energy today to discuss this very, very important topic. So it's fantastic that people are feeling so energetic and positive today. That's really good to see. Let's try to see the next one. All right, so the majority of the people in this session are actually under 35, but we do have a substantial amount of people over 35, and this is very, very good, and we're happy about it. So we can ensure that this conversation is not only among young people, but it's also across generations and across age groups. So we're really happy to see that we have people almost in all age spectrums we have actually put in here. So that's really good to see how well distributed we are today. And let's see the next question. Let's see about gender identification. All right. It seems we have slightly more female participants, but we are also distributed in terms of the gender of our participants today. So that's also good to see that we have people from different genders present in today's session. And let's ask about what countries you're from. Uh-huh. So Canada, Philippines, Singapore, India. All right, so we have present many different regions of the world. We have people from the African region, we have people from Latin America, people from North America, people from Europe, people from Asia, and the list is growing. Well, that's fantastic. So what we see from today is that people are, first of all, very motivated. We see that we have people from all genders. We see that we have a good age distribution, and we also have a good regional distribution, that we have people from all regions in the world. And that's really nice, because it will really allow us to have a conversation which takes us very diverse perspectives on this matter. And I don't recall now if we have more questions actually in the introduction section. Can you, let's see if the next one is. Yes, what is your background? That's one that I had forgotten actually.
Julian, also, we only see half of the people who have joined the call answering them. We would really want to hear from everybody. So maybe if you all could just join in. Yeah, now I can see the number growing. Thank you.
That is also true. So if you can please go to AHA Slides. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes so you can also join in the link that is in the comments right now. So yeah, join in so we can hear from everyone. Okay, so we see that we have half of the people present are students or from academia. And that's also really nice, because we're gonna be talking about education. So we're gonna be having people who experience education on their own skin. And that's really, really, really good. But we also have people that are working in NGOs and civil society and media and the government, as well as other sectors. And this is really important as well, because this is a discussion that is important to have everyone on board, as education is something that is so important. And it gives also a good possibility for non-students to as well hear what are the thoughts and impressions that student has on education generally. All right, so if I'm not wrong, that was actually the last question of getting to know each other. So we can move on now, now that we know the background of the public today. So I'm gonna be giving the word to Sefa Tauli, who will be setting a little bit the context of today's discussion. And yes, sort of the floor is yours, Sefa.
Sure. Thank you so much, Julian, and hi everyone. It's really nice to see everyone here today. My name is Sefa. I'm with the steering committee of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and I'm from the Philippines. So it's late where we are, and I see that there are others from the Philippines also. So let's try to summon our end of day energy. Okay, so I'm going to be answering a bit the question, why are we here today, and see what is transformative education all about. And it starts with a bit of a reflection of what it is that we need to live. So if you think about this question, what it is that we need to live, I'm sure many of you are thinking things like food, water, air, medicine. Some of you might be thinking around like ecosystem services, pollination, things like this, protection from floods. Some of you might be thinking in terms of art, in terms of community, in terms of culture. And all of these things that we need to live are all actually underpinned by what we call biodiversity or the web of life. And biodiversity refers to the diversity of like species, ecosystems, genes, and it's the variety of and their interactions between these, and it forms the variety of all life on Earth. But life on Earth is not only biodiversity; it's also cultural diversity, which is essentially the diversity of things like languages, like worldviews, like knowledge systems, identities, practices, and norms. And cultural diversity is also very important to take into account because cultural diversity is it reflects the diverse ways that we relate to nature, and it gives us resilience um, as as societies, right? However, biodiversity and cultural diversity are currently in decline. So biodiversity is in crisis. You might have heard many headlines recently um, about the unprecedented rate of the loss of our species. Um, Reports say that more than 1 million species are now at risk of extinction, um, and that uh, this loss of biodiversity is really um, causing it's really undermining our ability to survive and to survive in a good quality with a good quality of life. Not only is biodiversity in crisis, but we're also facing cultural diversity loss, cultural extinctions. This is being this is being manifested in things like knowledge loss, language loss, assimilation, and we're becoming essentially. There's a risk that we're becoming a monoculture. Um, so not just like of plants, but really a literal monoculture. And we are, or humanity has been extracting more and more and more things from nature, um, which are based on unsustainable practices. And not only that, but uh, the costs and the benefits of environmental harm are not being distributed equally, um, where there are different places in the world and different groups who are gaining more while others get less, and others bear more of the harm and others get less, right? And so, and another thing is that we are facing uh, more and more disconnection from nature, especially in places that are industrialized or places that are urbanized. And so all of this is leading to not just an environmental crisis, right? But it's leading to a social ecological crisis. Um, and it's manifesting in the things that we are seeing today in terms of inequality, um, deforestation, even this pandemic, right? But what now? And what can we do about all of these crises that are all interconnected and that have roots in the same things? Um, so experts are saying or are telling us that all of these crises that we face have their roots really um, in the values and behaviors of society. And um, they experts are telling us that what we need in order to address these crises is what they are calling transformative change, which is really a fundamental, a system-wide strategic reorganization um, across all sectors or across all aspects and across all factors, be they technological, economic, social. Um, and this change, yeah, so we will need really big changes in the way our society works in order to address really what is causing our social ecological crisis. And so we've come to education, which has really been identified as a very key leverage point to enable this transformative change that we're calling. And actually, we don't really need experts to tell us this. I think many of us here really understand and recognize that education is a very key enabler towards a better future, towards a sustainable future, um, because of its very fundamental roles in shaping values, behaviors, and transmitting knowledge and capabilities, right? And many young people all over the world, from our consultations that we've been conducting as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, recognize the role of education in achieving a future of living in harmony within nature, right? But however, even though we recognize this, many young people believe that current systems of education are not sufficient yet for it to really have this transformative role. And so many young people are calling for an education that is really, transformative. And what does this mean? It's we're referring to this transformative as transformative education, and this refers to the diverse approaches to education and learning that really will foster an active citizenry that is aware of our place in the web of life and our role in society, and what an education that is, or an education that makes us a society that is capable of bringing us towards a sustainable, peaceful, just, and equitable future in harmony with nature. So, this is what uh, transformative education is all about. And specifically, what many young people have been pointing to are things like the need for an education that nurtures connectedness to nature, that integrates content on biodiversity, cultural diversity, social justice, sustainability, an education that is high quality, that is being supported, that is holistic in its approaches, that encompasses education at all levels and not just formal education, but also non-formal and informal education, that really fosters sustainable, respectful, proactive societies that is accessible and inclusive, and many other aspects that I'm sure we will dive into deeper today. Um, so I'm really excited to hear everyone's views about this in the next hour. Um, and essentially, some ideas of how we can make this a reality are really referring to things like integrating it across all levels, supporting it, recognizing the value of non-formal education as well in learning, ensuring an education that is culture rooted, um, and ensuring that education institutions support their local communities and engage with their local communities, that we support teachers and support lifelong learning, and um, yeah, and its role in shaping sustainable transition. And also in this context, we are currently in the biodiversity super years, um, wherein they are we're in significant years in terms of global biodiversity policy, as the world leaders, many worlds of the world's decision makers are negotiating a new plan for how we can tackle the biodiversity crisis. And they are negotiating an agreement and a strategic plan called the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is going to define targets and actions that we will take in the next decades to address biodiversity loss. And we as Global Youth Biodiversity Network are really prioritizing, among other things, transformative education to be recognized as a key way to address biodiversity loss. And so there is a need for the post-2020 framework to include more concrete and ambitious language on this, and develop meaningful indicators and mobilize resources for transformative education. Um, and so that's the context that we're in. But really, this session is for us to hear your views, so that you can contribute to to what to the youth voices that we're gathering on this topic that we know is really important to many young people, and also hear from experts what it takes to really become for transformative education to be a reality. So with that, I'm going to end and pass it back to Shota, I think.
Thank you so much, Sefa. And I hope you guys enjoyed that presentation as much as I did. It really helps us see how young people across the globe are thinking about how they want to transform the education system and why this is so important to them. And now I think our next part is all about you, and we want to hear from you and understand what you're thinking at the moment. So for this, we have a few more AHA slides, but these are going to be a little more reflective. We are trying to understand from you. The first question we have for you is, if you can describe in one statement your dream scenario for the future of biodiversity and your relationship with nature. So before we go into education, we thought of understanding first the vision that we all have, the dream that we all share together. And it would be great if you guys could let us know what that dream is and we could discuss it. I already, somebody has already sent us the first one, and somebody here has written that biodiversity becoming a mandate of every political figure in every nation. That's a really nice dream. I hope that that happens someday too. There's another dream which says more support for indigenous educators with hybrid learning opportunities like land back and language revitalization. I think that's a really good one too. We are profoundly connected to nature as a part of our worldview. Yes, absolutely. I think that is like the core goal of transforming our education, to see that, profound connection with nature. The other one we have is non-human species matter and are prioritized as much as we worry about ourselves. Yes. I think all of you guys are echoing a lot of things we all feel. So it's great. So keep it coming. Then we have local nature integrated into cities and everyday life, communities to live sustainably, freely, in harmony with biodiversity, with land restoration at local communities. Every person understands the importance of biodiversity and environmental protection, stopping the biodiversity loss and nature connection, empathy with all species. I think all beings of life is great. All citizens have general knowledge of the importance and how to take action on biodiversity. No space for dispute against it. Okay. Increasing biodiversity through restoration and rewilding, creating local jobs related to these strategies. Yes, I mean, you guys, I think some of you are also hitting on this points of transition. Why do we need education to be so transformative? So that it links to jobs that are also that transformative and linked to nature, the way all of you are talking about it in your dream. Somebody has an economic dream related to economics. So they're saying economic changes find the balance between consumption and environment, with emphasis on equitable distribution of benefits. That's perfect. And I think if you had ever had a dream about the economy, that should be the dream. And then we have what we all understand how to take care of biodiversity, viable earth for future generations. Yeah, I think the bare minimum we want is a viable earth for us, for our future. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed reading all your thoughts and what you think. It's really nice to hear these, and I can see a few more are coming in, and then we can go to the next question. We have 2 more questions also that we would like to ask you guys. So we must go back to what really matters, to the true meaning of value in our life. Without nature, there is no future for mankind. Perfect. Then we have maintaining and mainstreaming of traditional indigenous knowledge around human responsibility of stewardship and regulating our collective institutions to take on this responsibility. Yep. Great. Thank you, guys. I think I really see some beautiful dreams out there. And as all of you say, let's now think about looking at these dreams and how do you connect them back to the education itself. And for us to think a little bit about the education system we are in, we wanted to hear from you guys about, firstly, what you think are things which are already present in our current education system and our learning that is working towards achieving this vision. Do you see there is already existing courses or values that are being taught in our countries, in our schools, or in our education system that are actually linking to this vision that you all just talked about, this dream that all of us painted together right now in the earlier slide? you can definitely take a minute to think about this, because this definitely needs you to close your eyes and think about which are the classes that really thought, or what in your education you felt resonated and actually helped you create that vision that you helped us create in the last slide. So the first one we have here is increasing integration of nature into all parts of education and more outdoor and impressive learning. That's great. I think the question is a little more about what's already there. And if you are saying that this is something that is there in our education, that is great to hear. Critical thinking, okay. Citizen science and community service. Yes, definitely citizen science and community service are things that are emerging in our education system currently in place. Yes, biodiversity courses we have clean green climate, I guess those asterisk signs mean. Um, okay, interdisciplinary critical thinking activities and topics that make new generations more sensitive, and global vision with local action. That's great. Also keep thinking about what is already there in our system. So I think somebody here has written non-biology curriculums, changes adding more light on environment and biodiversity, increasing number of non-formal and informal opportunities to engage with climate and the environment. Okay. So again, I'm going to repeat this. Try your best to think about what's already present. So I think some of you are already bringing that in. We do have another question after this, which is talking about what we would like to change or what we would like to be included in the education system. But think about what in your experience has been good in the education system that has worked to help and can work to help us achieve that vision. Emerging appreciation of open air learning. Okay, that's great. Exactly what I was talking about. Think about more of what's already happening. Hands-on learning through field courses. Okay, I'm glad to hear that some of you guys have these things in your institutions. I'm very impressed by the head, heart, hand model. Okay, that's a cool one. I've not heard of it, but I think we would love to hear more if there's time in this session as well from you. Practical aspects of environmental education, such as visits to national parks, indigenous communities. Okay, at least in Brazil, it's working. That's great. I'm really happy to hear that in your country they are doing this. Linking it, I mean, in India, I've seen them do it, take people to national parks to some extent, but not really to meet indigenous communities. So I'm really happy to hear that it's happening in Brazil. So let me see if there's anything else. More environment-related co-curricular activities. There's also getting nature lovers telling stories in school. Okay. More awareness on traditional ecological knowledge. Great. Thank you, guys. I can see quite a good number of points. Holistic education. So now the next question we have for you, which is the last one, is more about what aspects of the current education system and learning are undermining this vision. So all that you talked about right now are things that are helping us reach that dream that we all painted together in the first question. This is talking about what you think is not working. What do you think is pushing us away from the vision that we all have? What in our education system is not doing what it's supposed to do, or is actually hindering us reaching the vision? I can give you guys an example. All. I like that one. That's really spot on. But to be more specific, I could give you guys a siloed approach. Absolutely. I think from my education, I remember that everything for us, if it was biology or if it was studying the environment or nature, was all about rote memory. Like you just had to learn up the names of things, the names of national parks or the names of different plants, and just vomit it in an exam. So that's what we did. And we never connected with it emotionally, or we never understood it. So it was just plain reading of text and then putting it on paper so that we can get the marks. But it was never about, it's exactly like memorizing scientific name, not really connecting to nature. These were the things that I remember that were not really working in my education. education system. So let me see all the stuff you guys are saying. Non-Indigenous teachers teaching Indigenous culture, absolutely. That's not the right approach. Siloed approach, all of us see this happening. Fascist views on nature and politics, yes, and a lot of Western views as well, which are being considered as the worldview and are being pushed in our countries or propagated in our countries. Okay, then fear of being outside, not integrating environment into all of our educational system. Yes, the siloed approach again. Social expectation to become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. I'm really thinking this is somebody from India because that's exactly what happens here. But if it's another country, do put it in the chat so that we can bond over how our countries are. Memorizing the scientific, I already read this one. Fast implementation of transformative education without strong foundations, leading to lack of salience of learners and vague success indicators and outcomes of educators. Wow, that's the most critical way somebody could have put those points in. Thank you. Lack of critical analysis on the facts that are being taught in our formal education. Absolutely, we just read the words, we don't understand them, or we don't think about them. And we are not asked, we're not even people don't let us ask the question about why. If I remember when I was in school, when I asked the question why, people would be penalized for it because you were just breaking the flow of the teacher. So yeah, I think you guys are really putting up some of the key points. The stress of parents, yes, parents pushing us to do things that need to be done so that we become the doctors, lawyers, and engineers. Rote learning, teaching about nature with students, okay, in classrooms, okay. Holistic cross-curriculum approach is needed. Yes, that is needed. In my country, the winner goal of see comfort and money on the top of your life, and the leaf of educational problems without value. Okay, I think I get what you're saying. In our countries, we all prioritize to have that comfortable living, and that means having money, and that's the main goal of our education, is to ensure that we are able to get money, and not really thinking about how that has an impact on the environment. Lack of experience to real life. I really see a lot of emotional link with all of you right now to see the points you guys are putting in here, and I feel like I can resonate with everything that you guys are saying. And it's so interesting to see that while we are a global community, we can see such challenges that we all are facing in our education. And it's not just something I had in my country. So that's a big eye-opener to me. Thank you, guys. Thank you for every points. Yeah.
If I may quickly comment on something, some of you might have noticed that AHASLICE is censoring some of your comments, and that happens every time you write the word class or classes, and because of technical issues, then word will get censored. So yeah, just to give you a heads up that that's happening, and every time there's CL and ... it means actually someone wrote class or classes.
Yeah, okay, that's weird. So yeah, I get it. Staying in class, not going outside. We need to go outside. Yes. Thank you. And did you have anything else to say there, Julian?
No, I would just like to comment on that. If someone was wondering why their comments are sort of being censored by our application, that's just a technical mistake.
Okay. So yeah, mainstreaming biodiversity, lack of mainstreaming of biodiversity and nature. That's great. So now I think now that we've heard from all these amazing young people, all the people here who are talking about how our education system is undermining the vision, what's helping it, and what our vision is, I would like to now ask the same questions and get your inputs as panelists with me right now. So for this, I would go back to the first question so that you can see some of the points that people have mentioned from the participants, and request any of the panelists if you can see what you think would be your vision, and if you would like to, share your thoughts with us as well. And maybe even comment on something that you thought was interesting from what the participants have said. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share.
I'll get started. Bernard from UNESCO. I think I like I like all the sentences that have been put up, but I would go with the first one that came up about making biodiversity part of the political mandate. In part, it's something that we are pushing in UNESCO and also with some other UN agencies, that ministries of education and ministries of environment should push biodiversity and other environmental issues into the curriculum and to the school program. So I fully would support that statement. Do you want me to comment on the other two questions, or?
We'll go one question now.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bernard, for that. Sean or Gracia, any of you who would like to also tell us what you thought about, or you can also share your vision as well, or your dream with us.
I'm happy to go next if you want, Sveta. Sean here. First of all, I want to just take a second to commend GYBN. It's a very special organization. I have big fans, and I love that you're focusing on this issue of transformative education as part of your big pushes, because I believe education is the transformational leverage, but only if we don't think of it as education in the traditional sense. And we in the Commission on Education and Communication have chose to look at it as much more an immersive part of everyday life. And I love this first question because it gets to a big program we run called Nature for All, which really looks at how you create those early pivotal connection moments with nature that bleed into all the rest of your life. And it turns out those happen best when they happen with a family member, when they happen with a grandparent, when they happen with a friend, when they happen with a teacher, when they happen with someone from your mosque or your synagogue or your church. And those deep experiential love-based investments in our world are hugely transformative. I had the great pleasure of being on of watching Sefa this morning and the panel on Indigenous knowledge. A very inspiring panel that brought tears to my eyes. So thank you, Sefa. But it reminded me also that we can learn a lot about education when we look at Indigenous people and the way that they don't separate out at birth between an education system, a nature system, and a human system, and they integrate this concept of education and immersion environment from day one. So I love that you're focused on this and encourage us to think of it as a multi-tiered, multi-pronged, huge investment.
Thank you so much, Sean. And yeah, you're absolutely right. If I can think of how I got in touch and that emotional link with nature, it was from my mother, and how she used to take me outside and show me nature and show me those earthworms wiggling on the floor. And I think that's when I created it too. So absolutely, you're right, how we need to create these connections early on. Anybody else from the panel who would like to share on this, on your vision here?
Yeah, maybe me, Sweta. Yeah, so I'm gonna build on the answer that I saw, that it comes from the mind to the heart to the hands. I think the dream scenario of education should be one where everything is very practical and that we learn by doing like getting into the mud, feeling this environment, understanding it better. So I think this is an excellent way to really feel and be part of nature and understand our relationship with it. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gracia, for that. We could go to the next question, and I hope the other panelists can also answer for that one. So the one here is all about now finding out what, according to you guys, and reflecting on what other young people are saying, what aspects of the current education system and learning are actually working to achieve that vision that we have.
Go ahead.
I can start.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I personally struggle with this question quite a bit, and I really appreciated a lot of the answers that trickled in. In the student movement, our primary goal is to, in fact, criticize what's wrong with education. So it is somewhat unnatural to really come to the other side, like find things that I can appreciate. I found, so my upbringing was here in India, and I went to a government school, Kendriya Vidyalaya, here in Hyderabad. And I found that in those, in the government schools in developing countries, there is actually a huge opportunity for students to go out there, interact with the environment in an unsupervised, in an unsupervised setting. That really allows us to fail fast and learn quickly in an open environment earlier, and interact with what happens when I go into the bush and hurt myself, and how important it is to not be afraid in those settings. There's a fear that is associated with going into the environment, and in a lot of these settings that are not overly industrialized, not extremely structured, it allows us to actually interact with the environment in a manner that is friendly, that allows us to really feel in touch and in harmony with it. That those unsupervised interactions, in my opinion, in the places of academia and education where they are allowed, are something that academia and education has the ability to do really well, and has been for several years.
Yes, I mean, definitely, you're right. It is a challenge to think about it, but I think you did bring up a key one, which is there with having that exposure and a little more open learning, I guess, in like older schools, like the government schools that you mentioned, they do have that access. But I think as more and more schools are being developed in cities, that kind of link that you were able to get with nature might be lost because they're just buildings now in the middle of the city, which don't have even like one plant that they can look at, I guess. Anybody else who would like to add in as well?
Yeah, can I add something? Hello, good morning, afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time zone you are in. Yes, I'm very, very happy seeing all these answers on the screen. I'm very, very pleased with seeing place-based and land-based indigenous communities doing land-based camps, all these things that are really related to land-based education, since this is really one of, I would always insist that here in the context of the Cordilleras in the Philippines, indigenous people's education, which has been institutionalized as IPED, is, I would insist that it's always land-based. Indigenous people's education is always land-based education. And IPED is the best entry point probably for classroom discussions on biodiversity. So yeah, I hope we can extend this discussion further on really the power of land-based education.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's really great to hear that that's how it's being done. And land-based education is a key thing. And I guess that could be something that we can learn, be happy about, that it does exist, I guess. Anybody else who would like to comment on this one before we go to the
Yeah, I'll come in again. Yes, a lot of very nice points. I think the challenge is that some of these points are, in a way, context-based. Depends on, quote unquote, the environment, the educational environment, or the political environment. What would be ideal would be that all these very positive points you should find them in every school, in every, let's say, outdoor center, everywhere, not just in a few places. So there's still a lot of work to do. And one part of that work is to get out of silos, because unfortunately that's part of the problem. Because biodiversity is still too often seen, okay, let's imagine you're investigating and you go to a school. So of course you're told the first person you should talk to is the principal of the school. So you say, well, I'm interested in biodiversity and sustainability. And in most cases, the principal will look at you and say, oh yeah, I'll get the science teacher to come and talk to you. And the reaction is like, no, we should actually talk to all the teachers at the same time. Because you can talk about biodiversity in literature, you can talk biodiversity in math classes. It would be a very more exciting way to learn math for people who are not into math, you know? So I think all these points are very good. It's just that we need to spread them as much as possible all over the place, which is where UN organization count on the very dynamic youth to try and push that, both in formal, in non-formal, and informal education.
Bernard, I think that was spot on. Like, you are absolutely right. A lot of us are seeing that a lot of these things are context-based, and in some countries, there's some initiatives. Some of these are also just personal interest by a teacher who thought, yes, why don't I do this for my children? And it's all about their passion that then, goes to their children, the students. But yes, if we are able to really bring on some of these really beautiful examples to actually become cross-cutting and, be given globally and talked about globally, might actually help. And I think a lot of the young people are also saying, the people who replied here are also saying things that you are talking about here. So, you're completely right on what you're, on the approach that you're talking about. And we definitely as young people want to push for that. That's why we are all here. Sean, any last thing that you want to say, any initiative that you have thought about, which can again
I want to riff off of Bernard's thoughtful input. Often as policy people, as behavior change people, we look at educational systems as the holy grail, and you want to get into curriculum and you want nature to be in every class. But as Bernard points out, it's hugely decentralized. And it's not just decentralized nationally. Every state, in the US, for example, has its own curriculum with its own guidance. Different school districts may have different. So trying to find that entry point at scale is a great dream, but really hard. But you're saying what's working. And I want to flip it and recognize that the juxtaposition to the formal education system is the incredible service-based and informal learning system. And as we see young people stepping up to lead, to teach by example and explicitly through 1,000 ways, I think we can reinvent and democratize education to take it out of the hands of just schools and put it in the hands of people who care. And I think we see an increasingly beautiful amount of that. And a lot of that work is led by young people themselves. This summit is designed by young people for young people, and 90% of the participants of the 15,000 who registered are under 35. 25% of the commission I have the honor of chairing are under 35. Increasingly in the educational space in particular, we're seeing young people step up.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the perfect way we could transition to the next question. And I think we need to start realizing when we think about the education system, our brains kind of frame ourselves around, okay, what were we taught in school and college and in university? And what were we taught linked to that? But you are absolutely right that, we all are right now being a part of this change, and we are trying to change the education system, and we are currently doing it. So, you're really hitting some of the key points that we should also remember, and we should celebrate as well, I guess. So that, I think this last question, I think I was quite emotional when people were replying, and I did see, we did discuss quite a lot of the points already, but in case you guys see something that you felt was missing or something you would like to add on to what people have already said here, it would be really nice to hear as well.
And if you have comments, please keep them as short as possible, so we manage to keep within the schedule. But we really want to hear your thoughts. Don't let this comment discourage you from talking, because we want to hear your thoughts on this matter.
I'm just gonna unmute real quick and start talking to save time. So this is the question, yeah. And as sort of, absolutely, you're right. When you acknowledge that, the movement towards urbanization of educational institutions is in fact creating that disconnection. And this was, I agree, this is also a cultural phenomena. This is happening as we move more and more towards becoming a monoculture, as Sefa said in the opening. Now, my belief and my experience so far is that our institutions are often designed for profit maximization And that does not work when we're trying to maximize the access to education and making education a tool to move towards understanding of the environment, maximization of biodiversity, and actual stewardship. Because in formal education, we're implicitly, never explicitly, we're taught that the entire value of the environment exists in what is past the point of extraction, not what is before, and not as it exists the way we know it. And that neither is that possible in a society where authority rules over curious exploration and improvisation. Now, when I think back to those same days when I did fall into those bushes in around Kendra Vidyalaya, I also remember my teachers constantly saying, don't do it. Interactions with animals that are considered dangerous and poisonous are not encouraged, even though I feel particularly comfortable around those animals, right? Those creatures, because they are in fact my peers when I step out into unurbanized environment. This is something that I found particularly appreciable in North American indigenous, specifically Anishinaabe, in traditional knowledge, because that is one of those things where stewardship of the environment is one of the primary things that are taught to children that are brought up in Anishinaabe communities. Our current educational system fosters none of that. And it's an issue that students find ourselves engaged in, soon in the future, or, this is a question that we're going to be engaging in. We've been fighting for access, and we've been fighting for, this focus on biodiversity and ecology, and understanding and feeling comfortable with the environment. And I believe that this is something that's happening right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of you folks included in this right after this conference.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. You're completely right. And I think all of us currently do resonate with what you're saying, and we do believe that that could be the way that we should start thinking about this as well. And yeah, these are definitely the challenges. But as we are going through the discussion, I think we're going to have more and more scope for more discussion around these topics. And we're going to ask you guys some more questions where we would like your reflections. So for this, I would like to go back to Julian so that we can take over and move to the next phase of our discussion now.
Thank you so much, Sweta, and thank you so much to all the speakers that answered to these questions, and especially to all the participants that as well answered to these questions through AHA Slides. And I apologize that AHA Slides tries to censor some of you, but I think we can just keep going with the next question and give the microphone back to all of you participants to ask you a very last question, which is, we're going to ask you, like, what do you think is education must do to ensure that we live in harmony with nature or within nature, as Sefa was talking about? So if you go again to AHA Slides, to GYBN TE, to the link that is in the chat, and as well the link that appears here, you will find this question, and we would like to hear, what are your thoughts on what education should be doing to ensure that we live in harmony with or within nature in the future. And you have up to 3 answers, so you don't need to say only one thing. You can actually say several things. I'll give you just 2 minutes so you think about this question. All right, so I'm seeing the first answers coming in. I'm reading that it's important to decolonize the education system. That's definitely something that is extremely important, that needs to take, we do need to decolonize education systems. People wrote that our education systems must be inclusive. That's also something that is very, very important. We cannot make transformative change through the education system if actually the education system or other forms of education are excluding people. So we need to ensure that as many people as possible does have access and equal possibilities when it comes to education. Here we see as well that education needs to be accessible. So the same that it was mentioned before. And as well, we need to integrate biodiversity in all subjects. Can we go up, Sweta? Yes, and not just in biology. And that was something that as well was discussed, that was mentioned by different people before in the AHA slides, but as well that was mentioned by the panelists. Biodiversity, and as well by the presentation of Cefa, that biodiversity should not be something that we just study in a silo in biology, but it needs to be something that is a cross-cutting matter through all subjects. Education needs to shape our values. That's very, very important. Our values and our cultures do have a very important impact on the way we deal in our daily lives with nature, and as well in our path towards sustainable society. So definitely values are very important. Education needs to be safe spaces, and they need to be, again, inclusive. They should engage with students and should ensure that students can participate in education. We need to move classrooms outside. That was also something that I feel was reflected in the previous discussion, where actually students and learners and pupils need to actually be in contact with biodiversity and with nature. That's something that is very important. So we recognize that nature is not something that is outside us, but is something that we're actually part of. Education needs to be supported by policies from the local community and government policy as well. And it's, again, to be inclusive. It needs to be again inclusive. It needs to be feasible to hold practice, go beyond just the individual behavior. Going beyond individual behavior is something that is also very, very important. My personal feeling is that many times when we address the biodiversity crisis within the education system, sometimes the discussion is really limited to our own personal behavior. And we do not talk a lot about the structural issues behind that and how can we take actions of communities to make a difference. So then we see many times that the discussion is just what we're taught is limited to simply saying that we need to recycle more, which of course is important, but it's a very narrow perspective on the issues that are causing the biodiversity crisis. And we do need to move beyond that and talk more about structural issues. Education is to be nature-based. There needs to be, again, immersion in outer environment, which was mentioned before. We need to prepare learners to act for the planet. We need to consider humans and other species as part of the same community. That was, again, what I mentioned before. Let's keep, can we go down, Sweta, in the slides? So we need to be, again, able to explore areas, integrating biodiversity in all subjects. Again, it needs to be accessible and it also needs to be holistic. So taking all the possible aspects into account, again, participative, that engages learners and pupils to be active. Someone wrote, open hearts, heads, and hands through time outside, connect with other than human life forms, and see outside the box to develop an economy that is supporting a sustainable future. Education is to be sustainable. Can we keep moving down? We need to start early. That's also something that is important. It's not something that we should only be taught at higher education level or in high school level or teaching in our communities when we're older, but it's something that we needs to have from the very beginning of our educations. Again, more out trips, getting to know the lands, the land to learn from the other animal beings and indigenous knowledge keepers. Education needs to be relatable. It needs to include all aspects of life, dynamic and practical. They needs to provide paradigm shifts in individual and systemic behaviors, critical thinking, recognizing that we are nature. So many of these, as we can see, many of these, the matters that are actually being mentioned here, actually we can see that many things are repeating themselves, and we are actually, many people here are thinking within the same lines. We need education to help us to understand that we are not something separated from nature, but that we are part of nature. We need more education outside. Education needs to be inclusive, needs to be practical, it needs to be dynamic, etc. So thank you so much for these answers. If we could stop the screen sharing for a second now. Because these answers are not something that we are just asking and then we're just moving on. We're actually, we as Global Youth Biodiversity Network, we are collecting these answers and we're gonna be using them as well later on within our advocacy work. So actually what you're saying right now, when you're writing to us, it's actually being saved in our systems and we're gonna use it in our transformative education advocacy work in the present and in the future. So all this input that you're actually giving to us is extremely important. And as well, all the things that the panelists are contributing with that we're also noting down and including it within our advocacy work. So this session is very good for reflecting, but it's also very good for informing our future advocacy work. And now I want to go back to the panelists and I want to ask you some questions as well. As well relating to the answers that you have seen in this past panel of our slides, but as well on the previous things that people have said. And I'm gonna go first to Ankit, and I'm gonna ask you, now that you have seen what the participants have said about what we need to do within education and the education system and other forms of education, what do you think is the role of the student movement and the students in general in making this a reality? What is our role as students in all of this? The floor is yours.
Yeah, this is literally the single best question I've heard all day. And I'm super excited to. So here's the thing. Students as a formal movement have been at the forefront of struggles for decades now. We saw this before the World War when students fought for our own rights, when students took on a huge chunk of the role, even in academia for the first wave of feminism, right? And since then, we've established and are continuing to expand the sphere of influence in decision-making spaces. We're finding more and more places where students are finding direct representation, where we're able to speak for the things we care about, things that we want, things that we're demanding in spaces that are present. And that is, to a great extent, the work of the Global Student Forum that we do. And further still, utilizing access based on the above things allows us to create direct change. Now, direct change is often informed by direct action that students take. We're a large and an extremely diverse network that is typically resilient to time, even though institutional memory is difficult to hold. As a network, we exist for long periods of time. So the reason I am here today is because the network is so vast and expansive that it allows me, a student who's an international student from India, living in Canada, able to speak to all of you from anywhere in the world and mobilize from anywhere in the world. And that is allowing us to have major impact. Now, it also means that we're able to leverage our convening power more and more and more. Because of this diversity, students go on to take up spaces everywhere. A lot of the people in most decision-making spaces today used to be students at some point, which means that when we build capacity amongst our membership, it also means we're preparing this membership to be a well-informed membership for those decision-making spaces in the future. But also, right now, it means that we can create dialogue between various stakeholder organizations, much like yours and ours, right? GYBN and GSF are here displaying exactly that union of the student movement being able to leverage this convening power. And once this dialogue informs the formal student movement, we take direct action, create direct change. Now, there's another aspect to this. Students know what we want to learn. And we've moved the needle on so many issues within academia and beyond for generations. All academics were once students. And by engaging current students in discourse that is not yet happening in academia, we're able to create a future where these questions are answered, where students go on in academia and research things that are currently blown over by people who think that academia needs to produce things that only produce profit. That is not true. And that is a reality that we continue to challenge every single day. Now, further still, as we lay this foundation for academia, we produce these answers, come up with models, and start implementing them through this entire system where students take up space more and more and more for the longer and longer that we're empowered, existing as a movement, and talking to each other democratically, creating message boxes and creating lobbies and creating networks. this action actually allows the student movement to take a huge role in advocating for all of these things and creating the change that we want to see in the world.
Thank you so much, Ankit. I mean, I think that was a very holistic answer. And I find it very interesting because, I mean, I do have personally a background on the student movement and student activism. And, you know, I think this topic that you're mentioning now on the fact that when we do build community across students, those students will end up being, you know, taking different roles in society in the future. And as well, we're helping to shape their values and dialogue with them, and then they can sort of bring those values on in their future lives. I think that's an aspect that is very valuable, and I haven't myself thought about it so much. I've always stayed within the lobby work, but you know, actually I think that part is extremely valuable, and it's a very, very important part of the student movement and the role of ensuring that our societies become more sustainable. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for that answer. And now I'm moving to LA, and I want to ask you, again, reflecting on all the questions that, all the different answers that people have, that the participants have responded to today, have given us today, and together with what the other panelists have said, what are your reflections on that? And as well, how have you worked yourself with your community and students to foster indigenous values and promote living in harmony within nature? How have you done it yourself?
Hello again to everyone. So yes, I'm LA, and perhaps many of my experiences here are informed by a sort of experiment, perhaps, that we've done teaching in Sagada, mountain province in the Cordilleras. Um, uh, I think it goes without saying that issues concerning indigenous peoples, they always arise from the same place as biodiversity issues. And so what we did in Sagada, it was an experiment, perhaps in land-based pedagogy. And just to give a quick context, I'm an indigenous educator. I'm a Kankanaey. Many of the students I've taught in Sagada are indigenous themselves. They are Kankanai, they are Bontok, they come from different places in the Cordilleras. So it's an indigenous population, and many of my fellow educators are also indigenous. So that's the context that informs me. That's where I'm coming from. And what we did in Sagada, it was, as I said, it was an experiment in land-based education. Perhaps our attempts at decolonizing where land and the community itself are important elements in the learning process, and that there should be that physical interaction with the land, and the natural world is something to be experienced firsthand. So there's that. And what really helps is that indigenous people's education is something that is institutionalized in our place. However, it's there are still problems wherein sometimes many of our my fellow educators, although they are indigenous themselves, they would talk about indigenous knowledge as content that can be taught the same way that you teach English grammar. So definitely, even in indigenous people's education, there is the impulse to standardize and reduce indigenous people's education to costume and pageantry, the obsession with exhibits and displays, and really just failing to tap into the indigenous knowledge systems that will restore our relationship with the land. So even our institutionalized indigenous people's education is something we have to decolonize. But yeah, definitely, and many accommodations had to be made in order for us to do this experiment that we had. So what we did was, we just patterned our learning process after heritage mapping methodologies, and we appropriated these heritage mapping tools to serve our learning objectives, allow our students to come in to this understanding that there's an ecosystem between their indigenous practices and the natural world, and that a threat to one is a threat to another. And actually, I wish that it's my students themselves who are here talking to you right now, so that they can tell you their reflections, what they've learned, what values they've acquired after going through this. Our students spent a lot of time outside the classroom, and creating their own plans, their own maps to navigate the land, to navigate the community, talking to their elders, talking with members of their community. I remember students walking to Buasao and learning how the irrigation system has affected their water resources. And I remember students who had walks in the forests of their barangays and just documented the kinds of ferns that grew there. And then they discovered that this bagingoy fern is not only a water supply indicator, but it is also woven into ube baskets to catch kaling mudfish in the rice fields. And all of those connections between their culture and the natural world. And they would find out that the mudfish, the kaling, is not as abundant as before because of the use of chemicals in the rice fields. They learned through oral tradition how the land came into shape. And really, these dialogues that our students had with their elders also provided a sort of intergenerational dialogue. And some tensions would even arise. And as I think a number of my students would even say at the end of, why is our culture so elder-centric? They would say things like that, and definitely it has caused some hard dialogue, but definitely an important dialogue to take place. They learned how the traditional architecture of their inatop house is affected by the disappearance of a certain perennial grass, and their indigenous laws. Inayan is really most of their indigenous laws pala that they would learn is mostly related to the natural world. So all in all, there was just the intentionality on our part to lead our students towards the realization that the land, the environment, is the common denominator. And I just remember one of our students saying, without land, there is no culture to be built. So yeah, what takes place, I hope what takes place is a kind of just re-privileging indigenous knowledge systems. And what we designed really was students deciding on their own what to study, what to pursue, but the community is definitely their classroom, and their teachers. And our role as teachers is not a content transmitters or something, but we just gave them a methodology to follow, and they just followed their own maps, and they ended up with these reflections on their land and the importance of their culture. Yeah, so basically that's just what I can share, an overview of what went on in our community in Sagada, Western Mountain Province.
Thank you so much, LA, for
Thank
that
you,
very
thank
good.
you.
That was a very good insight, and there's so much actually to learn from that. I mean, listening to these forms of education that you're describing, and then reflecting on the own type of education I have received, I can see that it's really the opposite on what you're mentioning. That I think brings a lot of interesting points. That is not only, I mean, if for a second we put aside the part about land-based education, you also mentioned principles of student-centered, like centering education around the needs of the student, or like interaction with the community, intergenerational dialogue, and as well having dialogue with students about what are their opinions on the ways that things are being done. I think those are things that are extremely interesting, and I would like to keep that idea that you mentioned of sometimes having a dialogue with your students, because that maybe could be a next step to do, because I do think there is a lot to be learned from the education forms, the learning forms that you're describing, and a lot of that knowledge could also be translated to other education systems that do have a lot to learn from that. So thank you so much for that. And I'm gonna move the floor to Grecia. And I want to hear a little bit about your experience within the non-formal education system. So when I mentioned talking about non-formal system is I'm talking about not the type of education that you hear that you have maybe in a normal sort of in a school or in a classroom, where something that maybe the state is like dictating you that you need to attend, but it's more all that learning that actually happens outside the classroom, and all that could happen through volunteering, through activism, through also like through contact with your families and many different things. So all that happens, all the learning that happens, which is a lot outside the formal education system. So I want to ask you, what do you think is the role of the non-formal education system and the informal education system in making all the visions that we have been talking up to now and that people mention a reality? And how can we as society support non-formal and informal education? So what are your thoughts, Grecia?
Thank you, Julian. I think there are a lot of things, but I'm going to mention only three. The first one is that the main role of non-formal education in this environmental bubble could be to make us have a broader knowledge and understanding on what it is nature, how it works, and it helps us to understand it through a very practical way, this mind to the heart to the hand, learning by doing ways to understand these surroundings, but also in a very fun way. Because I think when you are talking about non-formal education, you like all the schemes and formalities are gone, and you are just like exploring the place where you are with the people you like, and having a completely different moment than in a normal classroom or this very how to say structured way of teaching, right? I think it also through these type of activities we can enhance the way we see things. We learn to see way farther than only trees and plants and animals. It's that we learn to see the connectivity, the interdependence, and this web of life that Sefa was talking at the beginning of the session, because once you are there, it's impossible to not really take a moment and to realize where you are and the importance of these places, right? Another thing that it's very important is that this type of education, non-formal education, really helps to enhance inclusion because it's like a live learning process. It covers all ages, and it's always delivered in different means and modalities. It doesn't have a specific way to be taught. So these allow flexibility and different types of understanding and worlds to be able to really flourish in a way, because then you are not kind of judged. It's just like everyone is sharing, and you learn a bit of all these type of worlds. But I think it also enhances respect to the different paradigms that we are going through right now, especially the gender, the culture paradigm, the religions, the ethnicities, because at the end it doesn't have borders. It's just a way of seeing the world the way it is, which is completely very complex, right? And I think another very important role is that it allows you to really develop soft skills and job skills that you will need to the real world, to really face the real world, because it's way more complicated that they have that the way they have taught us in the classrooms. And it really prepares you to be a global active citizen. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have gone through this type of education, you will be more responsible, you will be more committed, you will be able to be more autonomous and kind of like supportive because you understand in a wider way where you are and the world where we live. And now the things that I believe that non-formal education really needs right now, the first one is that we need to be recognized as part of the right of education, because for the moment it's not. And it's very important, like it's very formative in a way for human beings. I mean, through the network, through this type of conversations, we are learning but this is not still recognized as an education pillar for people, right? The second one, I think it's like all the learning outcomes that we have from this type of education needs to be also recognized, because when you graduate, you're only I am a manager, so in my paper it only says manager, but I think I know way more things than just being a manager, right? And finally, I think we need, well, two more things. I think we need to strengthen the linkages between the formal and the non-formal education and the informal, in order to build a very like holistical policy around the way we are ensuring education is like delivered, right? So we really cover the needs from the young people that are always changing, and then we make this education really attractive and updated to the reality of our lives right now. And last but not least, I think it's important that we increase funding in non-formal education programs, organizations, projects, because this is a way that we really can reach people and start shaping the values and the behaviors that our society so much needs right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grecia. You brought up a lot of very important and very relevant points that as well were ticking many of the boxes of the things that people were saying. The fact that learning needs to be fun. It's something that you're mentioning, that people have fun doing this. They enjoy it. They don't say like, oh my God, this is so annoying. Now I need to go to do all this volunteer work, because they actually enjoy it. And that's very important. The part about like learning well-being is fundamental. But as well, the part of being sort of non-formal education being a meeting point for people coming from very different backgrounds. And I think this is extremely important, especially in, of course, the education systems are very different, but in many cases, you do go to school with the same people within your neighborhood that in many cases tend to be people that look alike a lot and have very similar backgrounds. So non-formal education can create some new meeting points where you are confronted with the diversity of the world. And that's very positive. And maybe one more thing I would like to, that I think that you mentioned is the part of, that is really, really important, and is the part about funding. And it's something that is also really important, that anyone that has ever done any form of volunteer work, organizational work, everything that comes, that deals with this type of work, will recognize the importance of funding. And I think that's a discussion that we're not having enough, and because we do, I think it's a little bit sometimes of a taboo topic, that when people sort of feel that when you're talking about these types of organization works, you're supposed, of course, to do everything volunteer, then you should do it with no funding whatsoever. But in reality, funding is very necessary, and putting funding in this type of initiatives is actually very effective. First of all, you can do a lot with very little funding, and you can make, as you say, a much bigger impact. And that's something that we need definitely to have a more of an open conversation in relation to that. Non-formal education as well costs money.
Yes, thank
So
you.
to move on now, I'm moving to Sean, and I want to ask you, now that you have heard all the many different things that was mentioned within the AHA slides, and that you also have heard the previous speakers, and that you have gotten a lot of very different insights and thoughts, and hopefully some new things that you maybe haven't thought about before. What are you going to do with all of that? How are you going to integrate all of this within the work that you're doing today? Do you think that could be done? And if that could be done, how?
It's an excellent question, and you're putting me on the spot, which I love. But I'm going to tell a quick story first. So we're just joined by a wonderful woman called Meg. Meg is Kenyan. She's over 35, but she runs the wildlife clubs of Kenya. And I know Meg quite well, and I know that she started her environmental career as a participant in the wildlife clubs of Kenya. And I know that if you meet 90% of the environmentalists in Kenya, they spend some time in the wildlife clubs of Kenya. There's Meg now. And I think it's a really beautiful story. They have changed the entire conservation culture of Kenya through wildlife clubs. supported by government, funded by donors, creating opportunities for young people to go out in nature and experience nature. And I think, in a more profound answer to your question, Julian, the answer to the problem already lies in the community. We're just not sharing it effectively enough, and we're not funding it appropriate, and we're not scaling it well enough. There are beautiful examples of service-based learning, experiential learning, outdoor learning, green play. There's whole movements around dangerous play and recreating what an education system is. We just don't have many systems for surfacing them and sharing them at scale. I think GYBN is a perfect platform to do that, because your particular constituency is active, engaged, and are doing amazing things. And as Ankit pointed out, there's a powerful lobbying potential as well as an actual doing potential embedded in that community. At the CEC, we're doing two things in response. I am joined by my wonderful deputy chair, Katlin, from Hungary. She's joined the session. She is leading a task force we're just about to create on education. And this will be a CEC-wide educational task force on nature education for sustainability. And we would love a representative from GYBN and of course from UNESCO to be joining us on that work, so we can integrate and build our movements together, because we each have different constituencies, we both have different knowledge, we both have different access to funding and different types of expertise. So that's what we're doing in CEC. But for me, IUCN is a very beautiful institution, and I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid. I do my volunteer time with IUCN, so I can say nice things because they don't pay me. It's got 17,000 volunteers in 6 commissions. It's got 1,400 member organizations. It's got 1,000 staff. It's one of the biggest environmental networks in the world. And there's a new director general, and he has put the IUCN Academy as a priority for IUCN's future. So there's a new high-level commitment to education that we in our task force will be feeding into, and we invite you to feed into it as well. I think it's a powerful way to work at the scalable institutions to shift the way they work. And it's probably the last time I'm going to speak today, so I'm just going to say my favorite idea in this space is that if you have to say you're the teacher, you're not the teacher. And each of us has the potential to build capacity and networks and community around us as we go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean, for those very good words, and especially, like, I think the last thing that you mentioned is I was taking it with me after the session. I think it's very, very interesting. And I think it's also very interesting the fact that you're mentioning that maybe in some cases we do not need to reinvent things. We are hearing as well from this session that actually many of the things we need do exist, but we need to be better at sharing them and about not fearing to implement them in other contexts, because a lot of the discussion across borders on this or across sectors maybe it's more about sort of the traditional systems and some very concrete tools, much more than maybe thinking out of the box and seeing what's out there that could actually make a transformative change within our system. So I think that's also very important to remember. And and it's very exciting with this commission that you're mentioning. We are more than happy to, as Global Youth Biodiversity Network, to contribute to that work. We do believe that nothing should be about us without us. So we are very happy to be part of that. And yes, and we're going to be fitting as well in all the work that you require. And every time we're invited, we're always going to give our opinion on the different matters. And because of this, it's very good that today we're sharing our policy brief on transformative education that we're sharing at the end of this session. So I give you a little bit of a trailer for that. And now I'm moving to Bernard, because now that I have asked Sean and IUCN, what are they going to be doing with everything they have we have learned today? So I'm going to direct the exact same question to you and UNESCO. So I want to hear how do you think all this valuable knowledge that came out of today and from all the participants, how can it be included within your work, and how can you, well, move forward with it?
Excellent question. Actually, all I've heard ticks many boxes of and echoes many of the things we are pushing for. We've launched a new framework for the next 10 years called Education for Sustainable Development for 2030. And it's about transformative education. It's about changing the way we teach, we learn. It's about saying that education/learning is lifelong, it's life-wide. It's not just in classrooms, it's everywhere. We have to remember, a couple years ago, the OECD told us that 75% of what we learn is not in a classroom. So where do we, where is it? It's out there. It's in, for example, these environmental clubs. It's also within the family. Yes, traditional indigenous knowledge is important, but knowledge that passed on in families is also important. One of my grandmother was a fishmonger in Marseille. She taught me all about you go to the market and how to recognize fresh, good fish. It wasn't, I didn't learn it in the classroom and didn't learn what the names were. It was my grandma telling me. So we all have those experiences. I think that's the mistake. When we hear the word education, most of the time we just think about a school, a system where so many years are compulsory. At the end of so many years, you have to take an exam. And if you don't get good grades on it, your life is wasted. And so many countries are still focusing on this, what I call the PISA syndrome. How do we rank on this? In a way, who cares? What's important is what can you do with the knowledge you acquire in education? A lot of the things that were mentioned are the type of education that we in UNESCO and with other UN agencies are defending in terms of education about biodiversity, about the planet in the large sense. One of them is about this issue of interconnections. You cannot be in silos, you have to make those connections. Biodiversity is about life. So it's not just about, well, we have to protect the polar bear or these tiny animals. It's also about the connection to basically the clothes we wear, what we eat, the tables we have in our homes. They're all linked to biodiversity. It's also about making this connection. It was in one of the slides that way at the beginning, that we have biological diversity, but we also have cultural diversity. If we're going to live in harmony with nature, we need to go back to this cultural, let's say, socio-emotional connections we have with nature. There was a mention of somebody wrote, something forest bathing. It's some of these activities we need to keep those. We need to continue with that. In part, it's also to remember that education, it's about imagination also. It's about creativity, thinking out of the box. It's about making connections. It's about memories. It's about intuitivity. So what are we going to do about it? Well, in this new framework, we have a number of priority areas. One is policy, where it's pushing education into sustainability policies, but also pushing sustainability issues into education policies. That biodiversity should basically be everywhere in the curriculum. Second level, it's about training educators and teachers. But for that, we need to train them in a different way. If we're saying we need to be able to get the kids out into the outdoors, you need to get the teachers to be able to do that and to feel comfortable doing that. It's also making sure that in teacher training colleges, you have a mix of all these topics, that biodiversity or sustainability is not the last module of the last year. Quick, oh yeah, we have to talk about this. It has to flow throughout the teacher training colleges. And it's not just about training teachers on a particular topic. It's actually training them on these critical skills, on working in teams, on interacting with the learners, whether they're young or old. Third area is about learning, basically learning and teaching methods. Everything that's been said exactly is what we're pushing. You know, it has to be participative, it has to be fun, it has to be interesting. For that, we use what we call the whole institution approach. If you're going to have biodiversity, it's not just one teacher in one classroom, it's the whole school that should become part of it. Meaning you can have a vegetable garden, you could plant trees in your schoolyard. I mean, there was mention of, yeah, we're more and more into cities and there's no nature. And it's true, a lot of schoolyards in inner cities are just rocks. You need to put the trees back because we've noticed that actually because of climate change, it does make a difference in terms of temperatures around the school. Fourth area is priority youth. So empowering young people, giving them the skills, the tools, the energy, the motivation to become change makers for working for our planet and for our people. And then the last level is concerning the local level. Local level is where things happen. At the local level, you're forced to, you can't be in silos. That's where you live. You were saying, someone was saying, well, we all go to school from the same neighborhood. This is where we live. This is where we can make a difference. And this is where we've seen differences. So yes, we are pushing that. We're having, in a month's time, we're having a world conference to discuss more of these issues and to continue pushing. Yes, this is the super year for biodiversity. It's also the super year for climate. We are also, with other UN agencies, we're pushing ministers of education and ministers of environment to talk more with each other and to actually push for making sure that a core element of educational programs and curriculum is about environmental issues, in particular biodiversity and climate change, and that should be recognized and be fought for, promoted. So yeah, I would say basically the one thing we also have to remember is that we are all potentially educators and teachers. We can all teach each other something. And I think the connectivity through virtual is one way to do it. And in terms of, and it's also a way to exchange on, coming to the realization, well, we're going in the same direction. We can see it from the responses we saw. So yeah, just to conclude, I would say yes, to remember that basically education is life and life is education. So don't get stuck in silos and just let's keep moving forward.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Education is life and life is education. I think it's a wonderful way of putting an end to the panel. I think your points have been extremely relevant. Many of the things that you're actually mentioning are many of the things that we mention as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. The importance of including biodiversity in the school curriculum, but not just as something that is part of one, like something that you learn at some point during one subject in 1 year, but actually something that flows through entire education. I think that was really well put. And to teach trainers, to teach teachers on how to do so. And I will maybe add as well, we need to teach governments to understand what this means, because when we talk with maybe ministers of educations of governments and you tell them, well, we want more biodiversity in education, then they would tell you that thing that you mentioned we need to avoid, that is just putting it within the maybe just like 1 day a year in some lecture, and that's not what we need to do. So we're happy that you in UNESCO are doing this work to as well try to teach governments how this works, and we as well are very happy to support you with that work and to fit in that work, and we're very happy well, yeah, to work together for these joint goals. So thank you so much for to the entire panel for all those very insightful answers on so many different topics. I mean, we have gone through the student movement to non-formal education, to indigenous and traditional knowledge, to we have talked about what to do at the policy level. We have heard that the work being done by UNESCO and IUCN. I think it has been fantastic to hear from all of you on all these very important and very relevant matters. And we're gonna open up the floor now for some questions, and that's what Sweta will be moderating. We're a little bit limited on time, but I think it's worth to give the floor to people as well to ask questions to the speakers. But I would please remind the speakers to keep your answers as short and concise as possible. Over to you, Sweta.
Thanks, Julian. We have just one question right now in the chat, and Mark has been raising his hand for a while. I don't know, Mark, would you want to ask your question first, and then I can ask the question in the chat?
Thank you, Sweta. Thank you, everyone, for your discussions and presentations on the topic. The question actually goes to LA from Calderella, Philippines. You actually mentioned about the indigenous people's education. I just wondering if you are able to, for example, have some challenges on the policy side of the component of that education, and for example, how hard is for the youth to actually able to be actively participate on changing the policy in terms of the education. Because for example, at the other side of the Philippines, the policy component is very, very difficult if you are actually an indigenous people, especially if you're actually on the youth side. Do you have any advices for the youth, especially on the IP component, if they wanted to include IP education on the system for education in the Philippines? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, I'm basing my answer on what I've learned in my in Mountain Province, and that is iPad is it's more of a byword. it's 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 definitely something that a lot of teachers are actually enthusiastic about, and schools are competitive when it comes to iPad. It's not really thought of as something that is limiting. It is seen as an opportunity. Of course, some schools see it more as a promotional opportunity, but definitely there is more empowerment there than the limitations. I guess it's just how you are able to to really be creative with it. And again, I will also clarify. I worked for a private school, so definitely I am more free. I've been given more freedom to experiment with iPad, and my colleagues in the in the public school system have not been as fortunate as I was. So there's that element definitely. Again, that's an ongoing thing that is going on with iPad teachers, and I hope that I answered your question by just giving you what is going on based on my experience.
Thank you so much. We have one more question before we have to quickly wrap up. How to tackle the problem of interest and education bias with respect to distance education? The question is in context of environmental studies by Ram. Would any of the panelists want to take this up?
Just really quickly from our side. So we've, in our Nature for All program, which I mentioned before, we recognized early in the pandemic that people are at home, they're isolated, and they can't get the right language materials for the right target audience in a playful format. So we just created something called the Discovery Zone, which is community populated, different comic books, videos, hard curriculum. And now it's got 900, 1,000 assets from around the world that just help people, student to student, parent to student, teacher to student, bring this environmental content into the classroom. And it's designed to be interdisciplinary by nature. So I believe there's content out there. We're just not surfacing it and sharing it. And there's integrated content, there's fun content, there's multi-language content, there's indigenous language content. It's all there. We're just not sharing it as much as we should.
Thank you so much for that. Julian, I think we can wrap up now. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the questions and for the answers. And I'm gonna give the word to Amelia, who will be describing the next steps and yeah, where are we moving on from here? Ame, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to all of you participants and panelists for sharing your opinions this day. They have been very realistic, but inspiring at the same time. As given, we are wondering, and surely you are wondering too, then from here, from this discussion, what can we collectively do so that transformative education is a reality and not just a crazy dream shared by just few people? From given, then we propose these following steps. And I hope you can see my screen now. First, we can suggest to all of you to talk to your decision makers, to take this topic, all of these arguments we have shared, the importance of TE, how to apply it, and the principles for these decision makers to integrate this into the national policies, not just in the education, but also in the environmental sector, to create awareness campaigns, both online and offline, because we know that, as we have discussing, the in-presence events are so important. Also organize with fellow youth, as the Student Forum, for example, and convince schools and other educational institutions to implement these principles. And I think that we all agree on this, to lead by example. And I know for sure that all people that are here, we do this, you know, like to live a life that transformative education is it's the center of it. And as Sean mentioned it, like we don't really need to say things, we just need to act them and people will follow us. And also, I will send this invitation to all of you, if you're not part of our community, to join us to keep building momentum for transformative education. As given, as we have mentioned it, we have been holding these consultations to understand young people's visions for transformative education. We also have created a policy brief and a consultation toolkit on transformative education that you can bring into your own organization, your own spaces, and you can use these materials. They are open and they are so adaptive, you know, so you can use them. Also, to join these, as you joined this intergenerational dialogue, to join others, but also to organize, if you want, other intergenerational dialogues with your colleagues, and to join us in this advocacy roadmap that we have towards the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, for this instrument to fully integrate transformative education components. You can find our given policy brief on transformative education in this link. Maybe we can share with you in the chat, and it's under the transformative education folder. There are some other materials you can find there, also the consultation toolkit, and you can use these instruments and this information widely. It's for you guys. And two last things that I want to mention, two more steps that you can use, is that Sweta here, she with some other colleagues, they wrote a super nice blog article that you can read, and you can know more about what we are doing to support transformative education for this transformational change that we are craving for in the environmental sector. And lastly, I want also to share with you this feedback form. It's not compulsory, but as long as you share with us your views about this event, you can help us as given to improve in every event that we organize and all of the activities that we host. Thank you so much, and I come back to you, Julian.
Thank you so much, Ame, and yes, we have reached to the end of this session. As you might have seen in the chat, there are has been a storm of links that you can click into, and please check them all because all of them have very interesting things. On top of that, we have this youth manifesto that is also put in the chat, and please remember to sign it as well, as it is a very, very important advocacy tool. And remember as well to check our policy brief on transformative education that is freshly made and shows the vision of GYBN in terms of transformative education. Thank you so much to everyone that participated today. It has been some very intense couple of hours, but they have been extremely interesting and so insightful. And as I said before, we're gonna be using all your perspective to keep guiding our advocacy work up to the new global agreement on biodiversity, but as well to inform our advocacy work even after that. So thank you so much for that. And a special thanks to Ankit, to LA, to Grecia, to Sean, and to Bernard for taking time for joining us today, and as well sharing your huge wisdom on education together with all of us. And I'm gonna pass now the floor to Sweta. If you have something else to add.
A picture of all of us just before we leave.
Please. So if people could turn on their cameras, then we can take a picture. But of course, only if you wish so. And you don't need to be if you don't want to, but if you want to, it would be fantastic.
Okay, I'm ready. Big smiles, hearts, happy faces, everybody. And thank you for all the awesome people who joined us today. Yay, and go. Thank you, everyone. That was a beautiful picture, and we will definitely share it with you guys as well. Do follow us on our channel so that you can get to see some of the awesome tweets that come out from this session as well. Thank you, guys. And I hope you have a great day and a great time, and continue to have a great time in the Global Youth Summit. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Should I end the meeting now?
Yes.
Okay. Bye, everyone.